Begin. The sun beat down on Jed's ranch, a lonely speck in the wide, dusty prairie. He was a man made of hard work and quiet kindness. His face weathered like an old fence post, but his eyes still bright. His home wasn't much, just a small cabin and a barn that leaned a little, but it was his. Around the barn, the air smelled of dry hay and horse, a comforting scent. Jed walked past the big, wooden water trough, its edges smooth from years of thirsty muzzles. He often topped it off, even when it wasn't quite empty, just in case a stray animal or a tired traveler needed a drink. His horses, Old Bess and Young Rusty, stood nearby, swishing their tails at flies. Their saddles hung neatly on pegs inside the barn, well-oiled and ready for a long day's ride. Each leather strap was supple, each buckle shined, showing Jed's careful hand. He believed in taking good care of his tools, just like he took good care of everything else. Beyond the barn, the land stretched out, flat and endless until it met the distant flat-topped mesa. Jed knew every dip and rise, every prickly pear and gnarled mesquite tree. He had ridden these trails for years, sometimes just for the sake of it, sometimes to check on his small herd of cattle that roamed freely. He often saw the faint tracks of the Border Patrol vehicles, thin lines in the dust that showed where others had passed. But mostly it was just him, the sky, and the vast, quiet land. It was a good life, simple and true, even if it was a little bit lonely. Begin. One sweltering afternoon, Jed rode out towards the mesa, checking on a far-flung fence line. The sun beat down like a hammer, making the air shimmer above the dry earth. Even his trusty horse, Bess, seemed to move a little slower, her head low. As they neared the base of the rocky outcrop, a flicker of movement caught Jed's eye. It was small, barely a shadow against the sun-baked ground. He reined Bess in, his brow furrowed with curiosity. As they got closer, the shape became clearer. A tiny horse, no bigger than a large dog, huddled against a sun-warmed rock. It was a colt, still wobbly on its spindly legs, but something was terribly wrong. Its coat was dull, matted with dust, and its head hung low. Its breathing was shallow, and its eyes, when Jed got close enough to see them, were cloudy and distant. It looked like it had been left behind, maybe separated from its mother, and the harsh desert had quickly taken its toll. Jed dismounted slowly, not wanting to scare the fragile creature. The ground around the colt was cracked and dry, not a drop of moisture anywhere. He could see its ribs sticking out, and its tiny nostrils flared with each struggling breath. It was clear the little one was terribly thirsty, maybe even dying. It didn't try to run, didn't even lift its head much, just shivered faintly in the hot air. Jed's heart went out to the poor thing. It was a picture of pure helplessness, looking utterly lost and almost gone. He knew he couldn't just leave it there. Begin. Jed carefully knelt beside the colt, his movements slow and gentle. He untied his canteen from his saddle and poured a small amount of water into his cupped hand. The colt barely stirred, its eyes still cloudy. Jed dipped a finger into the water and gently touched it to the colt's parched lips. At first, there was no reaction. He tried again, patiently, until the tiny tongue flickered out, tasting the precious liquid. Slowly, carefully, Jed coaxed more water into the colt. He used his hat to shade the little creature from the fierce sun. Once the colt had taken a few sips, Jed carefully scooped it up into his arms. It was surprisingly light, just skin and bones. He carried it back to Bess, who stood patiently, seeming to understand the delicate cargo. Jed carefully placed the colt across his saddle, holding it steady as they made their slow journey back to the ranch. Back at the barn, Jed set up a soft bed of straw in a quiet corner. He mixed a little bit of sugar into warm water, making a sweet drink that would give the colt energy. He fed it tiny amounts with a clean rag, dabbing the liquid onto its gums. For days, Jed spent nearly every waking hour tending to the colt. He cleaned its dusty coat, spoke to it in soft, comforting tones, and made sure it drank often. He even slept in the barn, waking every few hours to check on his small patient. It was a long, slow fight, But Jed's steady care and deep compassion slowly brought the little colt back from the brink. Bit by bit, the colt grew stronger, its eyes brighter, its breathing easier. And begin. After a few weeks, the little colt was a different creature altogether. Its coat was sleek, its eyes bright and curious, and it trotted with a playful bounce. Jed had named him Lucky for obvious reasons. Lucky followed Jed like a shadow, whinnying softly when Jed appeared in the barn. Jed knew Lucky was ready to return to a life beyond the barn walls, but he wondered where its owner might be. Then, one morning, a rider appeared on the horizon, a young man on a weary horse. He rode straight for Jed's ranch, his eyes scanning the property. As he drew closer, Jed saw the worry etched on his face. The young man dismounted, his gaze falling on Lucky, who was nibbling at some hay near the water trough. A look of pure relief washed over his face. "Lucky!" the young man exclaimed, rushing forward. The colt whinnied happily, rubbing its head against the man's chest. He turned to Jed, his eyes full of thanks. "I'm Silas," he said, shaking Jed's hand firmly. "I lost him near the mesa weeks ago. A dust storm hit, and he got separated from the herd. I looked for days, but I thought he was gone for good." Jed just nodded, a small smile on his face. "He was in a bad way when I found him. Dehydrated." Silas listened, his gratitude clear. He offered Jed money, but Jed waved it away. Just glad he made it. From that day on, Silas would often ride out to Jed's ranch, sometimes bringing supplies, sometimes just to talk. He was a traveling man, often away, but their bond grew strong, built on shared respect and the miracle of Lucky's survival. Silas became a true friend, someone Jed could count on, no matter how far apart they might be. And begin. Years turned into a decade. Jed's hair had a few more streaks of gray, and Bess had slowed down a step or two, but life on the ranch remained much the same. Jed still woke with the sun, still cared for his land and his animals with the same quiet dedication. Silas visited less often now, his work taking him to distant towns and territories. But when he did, their conversations picked up right where they left off, as if no time had passed. Jed continued his daily patrols, mending fences, checking on his small herd. He often rode near the mesa, a familiar landmark on the horizon. Over time, he started noticing more and more tracks in the dust. Not just the usual animal prints or the occasional wanderer. These were different. There were definite signs of vehicles, larger than any ranch truck, leaving deep ruts in the earth. And sometimes he'd see footprints, too many for a single traveler, often scuffed and indistinct, as if the people walking had been tired or trying to hide their path. He recognized the distinct pattern of Border Patrol tires, sometimes fresh, sometimes old. But there were other tracks, too, often weaving off the main trails, leading into the rougher terrain near the mesa's hidden caves and canyons. Jed would scratch his head, puzzled. Why so much traffic out here, in the middle of nowhere? He figured it was just part of the border business, maybe more agents on duty or folks trying to cross unseen. It didn't seem to bother his cattle, so he didn't worry too much. He was a simple man, focused on his ranch, and the ways of the world beyond his fence lines often remained a mystery to him. He never connected the faint, dusty marks to anything truly amiss. And begin. One dusty afternoon, a rider appeared on the horizon, moving fast. Jed, wiping sweat from his brow, watched him approach. It wasn't just any rider, it was Silas. But something was different. Silas's usual easy smile was gone, replaced by a grim, hard line. His eyes, usually full of life and mischief, were now sharp and worried, darting around as if expecting trouble. He rode a powerful horse, not the same one he'd had years ago, and it looked as road-worn as its rider. Silas dismounted quickly, his boots hitting the ground with a thud. He didn't offer a usual greeting, just a quick nod. "Jed," he said, his voice low and serious. "I need your help." Jed looked at his friend, a knot forming in his stomach. Silas was a bounty hunter now, a man who chased down outlaws and fugitives. That meant he saw a lot of bad things, but Jed had never seen him look quite this troubled. Silas's hands, usually quick and confident, seemed to grip the reins tighter than needed. There was a weariness in his posture that went deeper than just a long ride. "What is it, son?" Jed asked, concern coloring his tone. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Silas ran a hand through his hair, his gaze sweeping over the familiar ranch yard, lingering for a moment on the water trough and the distant mesa. "Worse than a ghost, Jed. I've been tracking some ugly business, and it leads right here to this stretch of land." He paused, taking a deep breath. "There's something wrong out there, something real bad happening near your mesa. And I have a hunch those tracks you've been seeing, they're part of it." "And begin." Silas pulled a worn map from his saddlebag, unfolding it on the dusty ground. His finger traced lines, not of roads or rivers, but of unusual movements he'd noted. "For months now, I've been hearing whispers, then seeing patterns. People disappearing, folks who work the fields further south. They vanish, often near the border, and their families get strange messages or no messages at all." He pointed to a spot on the map, right where the mesas stood. "My trail led me here, to these parts." Jed knelt beside him, his gaze following Silas's finger. "I've seen tracks, Silas," Jed admitted, his voice low. "Big vehicles and lots of footprints, sometimes heading into the rough country around the mesa. I just figure it was border patrol or folks trying to sneak across." Silas shook his head grimly. "It's more than that, Jed. I've followed these tracks myself. They don't always look like patrol. They look like they're trying to be hidden. And the footprints, they're too many for just a few people, and often they seem like they're being forced along or very, very tired." He stood up, pacing a short distance. "I talked to some folks, desperate families who said their loved ones were promised work, good money, but then they just vanished. No word, no pay, just silence." A chill ran down Jed's spine. He'd lived a quiet life, far from such dark doings. "Are you saying?" "I'm saying," Silas cut in, his voice tight, "that I think there are bad people out here using this remote land to hide what they're doing. They're taking advantage of folks who are just trying to find a better life. It's like they're trapping them, using them for some terrible purpose." His eyes met Jed's, holding a mix of anger and sorrow. "And I think they're using the mesa as their hideout." And begin. The next morning, Jed and Silas rode out, heading towards the mesa. Jed's familiar landscape now looked different, seen through Silas's worried eyes. Jed pointed out the faint tracks he'd noticed, leading off the main trails. Silas dismounted, examining them closely. "See how they try to cover them?" he muttered, scuffing the dirt with his boot. "But not good enough for a practiced eye." As they got closer to the mesa's base, Jed's years of knowing every rock and crevice proved useful. He showed Silas a hidden path he'd only ever used to find a lost calf, a narrow trail that wound up into a series of small canyons and overhangs. It wasn't on any map, known only to those who truly belonged to the land. As they followed it, the air grew still, the sounds of the prairie fading. Then they started to see things that made their blood run cold. A discarded water bottle, not like any Jed had ever seen, with foreign writing on it. A scrap of cloth, torn and muddy, tied to a low branch, as if by accident. Further in, tucked behind a cluster of boulders, they found a small, makeshift fire pit, still showing signs of recent use. It was carefully hidden, but the ashes were still warm. The smell of burnt wood and something else, something metallic and unsettling, hung faintly in the air. "Someone's been camping here," Silas whispered, his hand going to the pistol at his hip. "And they're trying very hard not to be found." Jed's heart pounded. This wasn't just stray travelers. This was deliberate. This was sinister. The familiar quiet of his prairie now felt heavy with secrets, and a cold dread settled in his gut. The peace he'd always known here was gone, replaced by a growing sense of danger and injustice. And begin. With renewed purpose, Jed and Silas moved deeper into the hidden canyons, following the subtle signs. Jed's rancher's eye for terrain, combined with Silas's bounty hunter's knack for tracking, paid off. They found more discarded items, empty cans of unfamiliar food, cheap blankets, and even a child's worn-out shoe. Each discovery made Jed's heart heavier, painting a clearer picture of who these mysterious travelers were. They scaled a steep, rocky incline using ropes Silas carried, and from a high vantage point they saw it. Tucked into a wide, secluded hollow, almost invisible from the ground below, was a makeshift camp. It wasn't just a temporary stop. There were several rough shelters built from tarps and scavenged wood, a larger, more permanent fire pit, and even a crude fence. And within the fence, a group of people. They looked thin and weary, huddled together. Some sat on the ground, heads bowed, while others tried to prepare food over a small fire. Two men, burly and watchful, stood guard at the entrance to the hollow, carrying rifles. Jed's stomach clenched. These weren't willing campers. This was a prison. Silas pulled out a spyglass, peering through it. "Migrant workers," he whispered, his voice tight with anger. "Just as I feared. They trick them with promises of work, then hold them here, probably waiting to sell them to someone else or force them into labor." He pointed. "See that big one? He's known to be a cruel man, one of the worst." Jed felt a cold wave of fury. This was beyond anything he'd imagined. The quiet beauty of his prairie was being used for something truly evil. End. Begin. Jed and Silas knew they couldn't simply ride in. The armed guards were a problem, and the safety of the trapped workers was their main concern. They pulled back, finding a safe spot to make a plan. Jed, with his deep knowledge of the mesa's secret paths and hidden caves, became the guide. Silas, with his experience in dealing with dangerous men, took the lead on how to approach. "There's a narrow gully that runs behind that rock formation," Jed whispered, pointing to a jagged part of the mesa wall. "Comes out right above their main camp. It's a tight squeeze, but we can get through unseen." Their plan was simple but brave. Jed would use his ranching skills to create a diversion. He knew how to spook a small herd of wild mustangs that grazed nearby, sending them stampeding towards the camp from an unexpected direction. This would draw the guards' attention, pulling them away from a main group of workers. Meanwhile, Silas would use the hidden gully to sneak in and disarm the remaining men, moving quickly and quietly. They waited until dusk, the long shadows stretching across the desert floor. Jed positioned himself, a coiled rope ready. With a sharp whistle and a well-aimed rock, he startled the mustangs. Their hooves thundered, creating a cloud of dust as they galloped towards the camp. As the guards rushed to deal with the unexpected commotion, Silas moved like a ghost, slipping down the gully. He was swift and silent, disarming the surprise guards one by one, using quick, practiced moves to tie them up. Jed then joined him, his old shotgun ready, making sure the bad men stayed put. End. Begin. With the guards tied up and harmless, Jed and Silas quickly turned their attention to the trapped workers. The people, initially scared and silent, looked up with wide, hopeful eyes as Jed and Silas approached. There were men, women, and even a few children, all looking hungry and tired. Jed, with his gentle way, spoke first. "It's all right now," he said, his voice soft but firm. "You're safe. We're here to help you." Silas, though more direct, also showed great care. He immediately started untying ropes and opening the crude fence, his movements quick and efficient. They offered their canteens, and the workers drank deeply, some trembling as they did. Jed remembered the parched cold and how little it had taken to bring it back. He knew these people needed more than just water. He and Silas shared what little food they had, mostly dried meat and hardtack, but it was enough to give some strength. Jed's compassion shone through as he spoke to each person, asking if they were hurt, if they needed anything. He treated them not as a group, but as individuals who had suffered greatly. Silas, meanwhile, used his communication skills to explain what had happened, assuring them that the bad men would not hurt them again. He promised to get help, to make sure they found safe passage home or to the jobs they were promised. They spent the rest of the night making sure everyone was comfortable and safe. Jed's ranching experience helped him calm fears and organize the group, while Silas's steady presence gave them hope. They knew the next steps would be hard, but seeing the relief on the workers' faces, the first glimmers of hope in their eyes, made every risk worthwhile. End. Begin. The next morning, after ensuring the workers were safe and had food and water, Jed and Silas rode to the near sheriff's office. It was a long ride, but the urgent need to report the human trafficking ring spurred them on. The sheriff, a grizzled but honest man, listened carefully to their tale, his face growing grim. Soon, the authorities arrived at the mesa, taking the captured criminals away and making sure the rescued workers received the help they needed. Back at Jed's ranch, the quiet returned, but it was a different kind of quiet now. It was a peace earned through brave action. Jed and Silas sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in fiery colors. "You know, Jed," Silas said, breaking the comfortable silence, "I owe you more than I can say. Not just for Lucky, all those years ago, but for helping me with this. You faced down some bad men, and you did it for folks you didn't even know." Jed looked out at the vast prairie. "It's just what needed to be done, Silas. No different than pulling a colt from the brink. Everyone deserves a chance." He paused, a small smile touching his lips. "It reminds me, though, that little colt, Lucky, he taught me a lot about how a little kindness can go a long way. Seems like that lesson came in handy." Silas nodded, a genuine smile finally reaching his eyes. "It did, and it showed me that some things are more important than tracking down outlaws. Helping people, true helping, that's what matters." They sat for a while longer, two friends forged by the harshness of the land and the strength of their hearts. The prairie felt safer, cleaner, under the watchful eyes of men like Jed and Silas. And somewhere, out there, Lucky ran free, a testament to the power of compassion that had saved him and now had saved so many others. End.